Cool. Okay, hey guys, this is my sprint video for sprint one. And throughout the sprint, the main thing I worked on was need finding. So I have a much more detailed, I guess, synthesis of everything that I did and all the observations I made. And you guys can find that in my cubby on Google Drive. So I realize that you guys can't click on this link, so I'll add that link to the comments of this video. So the problem statement that I'm trying to tackle is that with this ability that Josh is working on to unravel and isolate the code for front-end components, we're given a huge potential to be able to teach front-end developers in different ways and kind of explore those opportunities. So I'm ultimately just trying to determine the best user problems for front-end developers face and how I can try to solve those using this potential. So I conducted 6 interviews of front-end developers throughout this sprint. They had varying skill levels, and throughout those I posed 2 tasks to the people I was interviewing. So the first one was basically sitting next to the person I was interviewing and looking through their code of a recent front-end development project and having them map out the process they went through for resolving a problem that they faced that involved the front end. The second task was asking people I was interviewing to develop a front end component. I did a few of them, and basically allowing them to use any tools or resources that they normally would, with the only requirement being that what they ended up building was such that it would be of equal quality to something that they deploy to a client's website. So I'm going to kind of skip ahead from the actual content of each of those interviews. You guys can also find those in my Google Drive cubby. I'll post a link to those as well. But I'm going to jump ahead to the user problems that I kind of extracted from those interviews. The first of which is that there's a lack of in-content component examples. So the main thing that pointed to this user problem was that one of the people I interviewed basically said that there was a huge difference between building a component for isolation, such as one that you build like to put in a tutorial, versus building a component that would be within the ecosystem of a larger project. So when somebody is developing for a larger project, seeing as the prevalence of examples are very isolated in terms of context, there's definitely a lack of relevant code that learners can look at. So the second problem, there's an application gap between seeing ideal examples and implementing them. So another people I interviewed, he was telling me about his website portfolio that he's working on, and how he wants to add a view to replace basically an uploaded resume that he currently has. So his idea is that he wants to be able to recreate his resume within the DOM. So when I asked him how he wanted to go about doing that, his response was that he was going to look at and search for examples of websites that had done the same thing, either actual websites or looking through design forums like Dribble to find those examples, and then he would, just by looking at those, try to recreate those and re-implement those on his own site. And when I asked him why he would do it in such a roundabout way, he said that was by necessity, like there wasn't really a better way to go about doing that. Third, user need. Recreating a component by inspecting the source takes too much time, effort, and overhead. It isn't practical. So I guess this is also kind of tackled by Josh's project, but essentially, again, one of the people was recreating, or was trying to build a image carousel for the second task, and he was using a plugin called Slick to do that. So on Slick's website, there are a bunch of like deployed image carousels so that people can play with and kind of demo. And instead of, so even though he had found an example on there that he really wanted to implement, instead of like looking through the source code for that example, he would go down to the documentation and try to find the same hooks for those features, just because it just wasn't practical or accessible to look at the code for those deployed examples. Fourth problem, it's difficult to apply development and design concepts to their front-end applications. So the first example here I kind of already talked about in one of the previous user problems, but another of the people that I interviewed explained that after she had read for multiple days in order to learn how to develop with an Ember, when she finally went to develop a multi-select component using Ember, she still felt extremely unequipped and ended up being unable to map concepts such as one-way binding to like a real component. Oops. Here we go. Fifth user problem. So it's difficult to search for tutorials that are extremely relevant to one's project. So I kind of broke down extremely relevant to three categories. So the first one is a similar kind of implementation. So it's hard to search for tutorials that feature code to build components using a similar implementation of the one that you're currently trying to use to build your own component. So the example that I had from the interviews was of an image overlay component just built with HTML and CSS. And since there are so many ways to do that, the user had trouble finding one that was matched up with what he was currently trying to do. So he ended up having to switch a couple times and ultimately just like stray completely away from tutorials and try to just hammer at it by himself. So the second definition of extremely relevant is custom components. So for example, one of the people I interviewed was trying to use a PDF viewer plugin in order to sit within this design idea that he'd already created before beginning to use that plugin. So he found it very hard to find a plugin, since there are so many, that matched his design needs. So he ended up going through the process of fully integrating each one, finding out that it didn't really match his needs, and then going on to the next one. So it was a huge waste of time for him. And the third definition of extremely relevant is tutorials that use the same library or tool combinations as the people that are trying to use them. So again, back to the person that was building a multi-select component using Ember. Even though she could find examples of how to build multi-select components with JavaScript in general, there weren't any good ones, or she wasn't able to find any good ones for how to build them with Ember. So, the sixth user problem, without in-depth knowledge, it's difficult to understand what exactly each line of code does to the UI. So this one's pretty specific, but during the second interview I conducted, the person was trying to use an image carousel plugin, and the forward and backward arrows on that plugin, without setting the meta char set tag to equal UTF-8, rendered the text on that button to be random characters rather than arrows, and it wasn't really very straightforward to isolate that was the problem. So, seventh user problem. Needing to abstract your instance of a problem to a more general instance of the problem results in frequently irrelevant support using existing tools and resources. So frequently when developers are trying to resolve a bug that they have, in order to search for solutions to that bug, they have to abstract away from their specific instance. So one of the examples of this in the interviews was that he was trying to build a multi-select component, a very kind of custom component, so this kind of relates to one of the other user problems, but in order to search for help on how to build that using jQuery, he kind of had to simplify his problem to just building a multi-select component, even though it was far more complicated than that. So the results that he ended up finding were unhelpful, and he had to kind of hack away at it and spend more time than he probably would have if he had found a very relevant example. From all the interviews, I basically extracted four user classes. So different use cases for which front-end developers would be or would want to use existing examples of components or code. So the first one is the learner, um, and these users range from beginner to intermediate front-end developers, and basically they just want to learn how to either build a specific front-end component, apply a concept, or just see an example for other learning purposes. The second user class is the fixer. So again, beginner to intermediate front-end developers, and they want to be able to use other instances of a component or snippets of code in order to in some way resolve their own problems with a similar component. Third use case is designer. So for this, the users can range from beginners to experts, simply because it's not as much a use case that revolves strictly around implementation and development. And this is when users want to nab components or pieces of code from an existing website that they really like visually, just in order to inject those into their own project so that they can either mock up, user test, or use for other design purposes. The last class is the improver. So beginner to intermediate front-end developer, and they want to be able to enhance their current code using examples of code that uses best practices or really good methods for performance or readability, or things like that. So again, my entire synthesis I'll link to below, as well as the transcripts from each of the individual user interviews. So thank you.